Good morning, everybody. It's January 21st. I had to look over my other monitor just to make sure. Welcome to the Technical Advisory Committee meeting where we are going to be talking about the implementation of Senate Bill 25-002. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. All right, everybody else should be able to see that nice wintry scene on this intro slide. Looks like we do have some weather moving into the state, so hopefully it brings a little moisture that I know everybody is needs on the ground. So welcome. Going to go over the ground rules for the public. We'll talk about the resources, just like we've done in every other meeting. We'll give you some updates on the State Housing Board hearing, public hearing yesterday, and the manufacturers webinar meeting also held yesterday. And then we'll take a look at the overall provisions and status of where we are. Then we'll look at the red line changes we've made since the last since January 7th meeting. And then we'll talk about some other updates, the responsibility matrices and audits and fire suppression. And we'll get a little update from Shums Coda toward the end. So if you are a member of the public, this is a Technical Advisory Committee meeting. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate your input and feedback. We do give priority to the TAC members as we move forward. If you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand or type a question in the chat, and we will get to you as quickly as we can. And then if you have any written comments that you'd like to send in, please send those to sam.albrecht@state.co.us. The resource page, there is the bill language itself that we are implementing. That's Senate Bill 25-002. We are governed by a set of statutes, Colorado Revised Statute 2432, 3301 to 3329. And you can find that by going to Colorado Legal Resources provided by LexisNexis. We are talking about the administrative rules for the Building Codes and Standards program, and that is a hot link. All these underlined items on this slide are hot links, and we will be posting the slide deck and the recording just as soon as they're available after the meeting. If you want the resource page separately, you can go to one of the previous TAC meetings on the TAC page. This page has not changed from the slide deck since we started implementing 002. And of course, the other two references there are the Building Codes and Standards website page and the Technical Advisory website page. So yesterday we had a State Housing Board meeting. This was the redo that we mentioned that we needed to do because of a technical glitch in the final rulemaking. State Housing Board was gracious, and we really didn't have a choice and allowed us to redo the entire public hearing and the vote. And so this was rulemaking one, and it had two major items in it. One was the allowing business entity installers. So an installer can now have more than one installer under their registration and their documentation. And also the single stair exit that some of the larger municipalities were got approved through legislation last year. And so that we just extended that into the modular space also. So both those passed. We filed for our Attorney General's opinion yesterday afternoon. And in 20 days or 19 days from now, we will be able to pull that Attorney General's opinion and then do the final steps with the Secretary of State in order to make that effective March 17th. That's the target date for that. Manufacturers webinar and listening session. We had that yesterday. Fantastic attendance. We had about 80 attendees. They brought up some really good questions. We went through the key provisions of 002 in it, but we really focused on the design criteria regions, right? We showed the working model that we have of the different snow and wind load regions. And then we talked about some of the minimum standards that we've been talking about today. I did notice that there were a couple of TAC members there. Thank you for attending. And so this is the major part where we ask the manufacturers, where would they like to see the lines drawn, especially on wind and snow loads, to define what makes the most sense from the manufacturer's perspective. And they are actually, we discussed that. They also discussed some other basic questions about the bill and kind of focused on the third party agency being the final approval authority for construction drawings also. So we're going to summarize all that, and we are sending out the slide deck and the questionnaire, which is we didn't get into a lot of detail where they thought we should draw those lines on wind and snow load. That is going out today, I believe, and we're going to give all the manufacturers a week to respond. That'll go to the same list that we sent the invite to, and so we should be able to get those numbers just as quickly as we can, and then we'll be able to finalize that or recommend a final proposed design criteria regional chart. So the provisions and status of 002, several things there. The responsibility and accountability. We are working on a draft matrix and matrices. It may come in a couple different flavors, and it covers the administrative rules on that side. The builder contract registration and education. We're talking a lot about the contractor registration a little bit later today. We fleshed out some of those chapters. And then we'll take a look at the third party agency plan review and approval. We've got those in chapter 5. The audit piece we are still working on also. We're hoping to get that wrapped up here in a week or so and have that out for review. And then, of course, we put the language in there already for the audit processors for every registration type into the draft rules. And then the finalized table, we're hoping to get that done very close to the end of the month or very early in February. So just a summary of the changes with the chapters that in the administrative rules. We added a definition for building contractor and emergency response unit. And Rule 2, which is our codes and standards section, we talk more about accessibility, wildfire resilience code, and the 2019 ICC G5 containers and the emergency response unit requirements. Rule 3 fees, we continue to tweak that. No major changes since the last time that we met. And then Rule 4, manufacturers, we for those that may be new to the group, we've moved that to their own chapter. We've also in the manufacturer section where accommodate the regional zones or the design criteria regions. We're removing the 3-year registration, accommodating the third-party agency final plan approval process. Third-party agencies is that new chapter, of course, and same for building contractors, where we talk about registration, certification audits, and responsibilities and education. Rule 7, that's also a new chapter in the rules, and we have gone over that. It covers responsibilities and coordination, and then with other Colorado state agencies, it's responsibilities and coordination also. Rule 9 is the sellers chapter, and then installers, we added audits and in foundations, We're adding clarification that we have the right to send out plans for third-party plan reviews. That's going in there this time. And then enforcement, we're still tweaking some of the final enforcement pieces. And then Appendix A is going to be our regional design criteria table information. We'll kind of show you what that looks like as far as a model as we're moving forward with that. Any questions before we jump down into the actual administrative rules since last meeting? Okay. So Rule 1, we added a definition for building contractor, means any individual responsible for developing an installation site or performing on-site construction work of a factory-built structure. And we clarified the emergency response unit definition that we had talked about previously. To align it with the rule 2.22.3. And so we inserted that there and added that red line text there that they may be used if a local jurisdiction declares a state of emergency, and that the emergency response units may meet modified standards or use alternate methods of materials or methods of construction, and just cleaned up that definition a little bit. Since last meeting, we also put in that rule for 222.3.2 regarding the emergency response units, that local jurisdictions may take responsibility for emergency response units permanently located in their jurisdiction, just to be clear. Rule 3 is the fees. The division may send plans for review to a third-party agency employed by the division for special cases or expediency. Any additional fees incurred for this review are the responsibility of the original entity requesting the review. So it's going to be a pass-through. And we'll work out how to get estimates and payment on those. Rule 4, no major changes since we last looked at chapter 4, which is the where we deleted the 3-year registration. Plans were approved to standard change. Plans must use regional design criteria zones. An approved plan must be submitted for each asset. And all third-party agency information is moved to chapter 5, and then we added the audit section. But again, no change since the last meeting. Now, what we did add was that manufacturers using the services of a building contractor for site prep or on-site construction activities are responsible for ensuring that the building contractor holds current license required by the local jurisdiction where the work is being performed or is registered with the division. And at 4.35, the division may send plans for review to that third-party agency. Again, just clarifying that again. We have it in the fee section, and then we put it in the manufacturer section too. Rule 5, third-party agencies. This is the chapter that we set up for third-party agencies to be registered and certified. And so we talked about the registration requirements and the audits. And we just a note in that we tried to incorporate ICC and BI standard 1205 that deals with third-party agencies. We did add in there the division may send plans to review to third-party agency. Again, just carrying forward that thought to the responsible areas of the rules. Building contractors is that chapter 6, and that where we talk about the scope of that for being related to on-site prep work or on-site construction. Registration and renewal, responsibilities, education, and audits. Some of the qualifications, we did a survey, a quick review of some of the other jurisdictions, and it looks like most of them are requiring a G11 or F11 exam for contractor licenses. We thought that would be good to just carry over into our processes also. We also added a slight red line addition. The building contractor, based on the definition that we just added, and in Rule 1.4, which is that definition of building contractors, just to tie it back to the definitions rule. Now, where we start getting into some splits of building contractors, we thought it'd be best to call out those working on one or two family residential structures versus multifamily structures. So we split those up, and the ones that are going to be working on one or two family residential structures must meet the following requirements in addition to Rule 6.3, which is 12 months of, and we modeled these building contractor registrations very similar to what we currently have in the rule for the installers. So I'm not going to sit here and read every one of these, but these was in the slide deck that we sent out. If you have any questions on that, we can talk about it. But it is very similar to the installer's registration and what we found in looking at our survey of what current building departments are requiring of their contractors, especially with respect to that G11, F11, or 12 or 13. So there are ORs in this. We tried to make pathways for building contractors to easily meet these registration requirements. So one is experience in the industry and that being the factory built structure industry, or just experience based on the number of hours. And that can be a combination of experience or education from paragraphs B through E, or a registered or certified or licensed to operate as a building contractor in a local jurisdiction or another U.S. state if that state's requirements are substantially equivalent to the Division of Housing's. And of course, proof of successful completion of the G13 or F13 residential building contractor exam for work on structures limited to not more than 3 stories. Then we jump to the commercial and the multifamily building contractors. Again, the same structure that we have in the installer's requirements with multiple pathways to get that. Hopefully we have made it fairly simple in our layout and in our desire to get them registered just as quickly as we can. So we'll talk about, again, there's ORs down here at the bottom of this that are very applicable to their pathway to be able to become registered. Very similar to the other single family small duplexes type of registration.
Hey Sam, do you know the differences between what's being adopted here in Rule 6 versus what is otherwise leveraged for contractors in residential and I guess non-residential occupancies?
When you ask that, Wayne, we looked at other jurisdictions on what they're doing. Is that what you're asking, or is there a different question there?
Well, Well, you said that this was pulled from, I forget the reference that you had made, but I just
Sure.
didn't know if it was verbatim pulled or if certain
No,
things
it's
had
not
been.
verbatim, so the installers are not required to take these G11, G12s. They have to pass specific installer education requirements. So this is a little bit of a different, it's just the same model going forward.
Okay.
Okay, it's not
All
word
right.
for word. Yeah. And then we added a responsibility section that the building contractor is responsible for verifying that any factory built structure in which they perform installation sites, site prep, on-site construction, or other work holds current approval by the Division of Housing. So that's just back on them to make sure that they are registered someplace, either with the local jurisdiction or with the state. And we clarified site prep and on-site construction in 661 and 662. And then for education, to be eligible for registration, building contractors must complete a mandatory training course focused on the factory built structures and the specific administrative rules and statutes governing factory built structures in Colorado or another division approved education or training course. 610, all continuing education courses may be offered and completed by distance learning. The following course format and administrative requirements apply to all Colorado continuing education for building contractors. Just some guidelines for the contractors that are looking for whether it's our sponsored educational offerings or if they have some other type of information that courses they want to use. And of course, we give, I know none of you guys are probably want to be building contractors, but we do give volunteers to the uh, TAC credit here. Here we just talk more about the type of courses. And the key here is they have evidence of course completion in the form of an affidavit or certificate of attendance. More details on the education piece, and there's one more after this. So this is so we really did flesh out that building contractor chapter quite a bit between the last rulemaking. I think we told you that's what our intent was. So if you have any questions on that, let us know.
Has there been any feedback based on the webinar yesterday, Sam?
Ask me that again.
I said, was there any feedback based on the webinar yesterday with the contractors?
No, the meeting yesterday was strictly an invite to the manufacturers.
Or sorry, manufacturers.
No,
That's what I
you're
meant.
fine. We are gonna once we have a final draft where the next step is as we get these rules in a really firmed up type of format between this meeting and the next meeting. After that, we're going to start having interested party meetings. We want to have one with local building departments. We want to have one with installers. We want to have one with sellers and another one with manufacturers, just to go through all these changes prior to the publication of the rules and prior to the State Housing Board meeting in May. Then we start looking at the renewal piece of this. We have decided to keep contractor registration to be annual. That's the recommendation from us. All that to the TAC is that we make it annual. We do annual registration for all of our other entities, so we just want to be in alignment. It'll make it easier from our perspective to do annual renewals. And then we talk about in 616 the renewal process. Local governments, this chapter didn't have very many additions. We are running into some situations where installers are being required to license with the local building departments. We wanted to clarify this in the local governments. And so some of them are requiring bonding and insurance payable to their building department. And we're okay with licensing, but when we start looking at separate financial surety devices and a separate registration fee, we believe that's a violation of statute. So we just wanted to clarify. And we may actually tweak this. I think some of the local governments just want a list of the installers that they can keep track of them on a regular basis. But we may clarify this, that they may not require payment for registration or licensing for factory built structure installers. Nate?
Yeah, so that you just said what I was getting at. I thought had kind of arrived at, it was kind of like dual regulation, so to speak, on, if we have to license as an installer in every individual jurisdiction that we work in. And I just didn't know if that's still on the table or if we're going to say that it's okay to require, allow locals to be on the state program.
We know that there are some that just want a list of the people working in their area, and I think that's okay, as unless there's concerns among the TAC or other installers. But it's that dual payment and dual financial surety requirement that we think is should not
Well,
be.
like my concern is if they and I'm not saying this from my standpoint, is if they basically, end up saying, oh, you need to have this contractor license level or whatever we want to come up with requirement wise, that's not bonding.
Right. Tim, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Question. We haven't had a lot of experience with these structures in Broomfield, but maybe just generally question is, are factory built structure installers typically or sometimes acting as the general contractor for a project, or are they just like a subcontractor?
Let me answer this one. So they can be, Tim, and in that case, I think if they're acting as a general contractor, they should absolutely have to license, in the jurisdiction. It's more just when their scope is entirely within the state's scope of installation that I'm describing. If they step outside of that scope wise, I think all bets are off.
That was my question to follow. Thank you. That answered the question from at least our perspective. Thanks.
Yeah. There and so we see it also in sellers where they may have general contractors that are working and doing some of that work too. So that makes the responsibility matrix a little tough. But yeah, if it's site prep work not related to an install, then it is certainly they need to be building contractors, and then would have to be, if the local jurisdiction has a licensing requirement, then that would have to be licensed there.
With that, would it make sense to add a clarification to this rule, or would that just muddy it up and maybe make it more confusing?
We can propose something for the next meeting. I like clarity, so we could add something that maybe a 7.6.1 that says installers that are doing site prep work or OC work may be required to register in the local jurisdiction.
I would flip it and not try to make a list of what they might do. And additionally, I would just say any installers working outside of the scope of the state-run installation program may be required to register at a local level for additional work contemplated.
And with the state as a building contractor.
There you
go. Yeah. All right, great. Other Colorado agencies, Chapter 8 in the rules, we simplified this rather than try to go through the requirements for each other state agency in the connection scheme. We just clarified that plumbing connections related to the completion of the factory built structure or the installation of the factory built structure are the responsibility of the division, and electrical installations related to the completion of the unit or the installation of the unit are the responsibility of the division. So we simplified this a little bit, and then that makes the other state agencies rules and requirements still applicable for anything that is not related to these two. It's more in alignment with what statute says also.
I really
Nate, I'm sorry. Did you say something? You're freezing up a little bit on my end. Nate, if you had a question.
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good.
Okay, you're good. Great. So sellers, just again, a requirement that if the sellers are using a building contractor for on-site work or OC work, that they hold a license in that jurisdiction or with the state if it's not, if this jurisdiction doesn't have a licensing program. And that's kind of related to what we were just talking about before. Installers, again, same thing, right? If installers using the services of a building contractor for site prep for OC construction activities responsible for ensuring that they hold the correct licensing. Foundations, just a carry through from the other chapters that we can send foundation plans out for review if we want to. Then Rule 12 is just the enforcement piece, and that's where we are still doing a little bit of work. But this is based on the discussion that we had, and Sean Roos basically what we want to add in that is that any registered entity may seek assistance from the Division of Housing to resolve issues before they result in a formal complaint or to assist in the resolution of a complaint. The more we can do pre-complaint, the better. All right, so those were the red line changes. Again, we're getting them dialed in. I appreciate your support. Happy to, if anything I said you have other thoughts on after the meeting, feel free to shoot us an email and let us know what you're thinking. Now, other updates on where we are. So we did a little design change on the matrix for design criteria regions. And then we just wanted to share it with you. We shared this with the manufacturers yesterday, right? So it's still draft, but we're trying to get this dialed in also. So over here on the left side of the table, Hang on just a second. Over here on the left side of the table, you've got the design criteria regions 1 through 5. We have the snow loads and wind loads, 40, 60, 80, 100 for snow, 120, 130, 140, and 150 for wind. And then, of course, 5 is the catch-all for anything that is outside of that. We put this big solid bar here in the middle of this one to kind of look at other design criteria minimums. As you can see, they should not be considered in a region. But again, we are still looking at making the base for Climate Zone 7, which will provide manufacturers the widest ability to place units within the state. Wildfire, minimum class 1, fire suppression if required by the locals, radon if required, and ADU fire separation. And we've got a couple IRC reference chapters there. So,
Hey, Sam.
yep.
Sorry, this is Wayne again. For
I see
fire
you.
suppression, right? So you've got if required by locals. Is this meant to be outside of what would otherwise be required by the IBC or IRC? Because 99 times out of 100, the fire suppression, because Chapter 9 of the IBC is common for the most part with the IFC, that fire suppression requirement actually comes from the building code, more so than the fire code, I would say, unless there's like a special circumstance associated with a code alternate. So just want to make sure, just wanted to make that point and see if there was intention there outside of what would otherwise be required by the base codes that we're adopting.
Yeah, what we've always done is we have deferred to the locals if they require fire suppression. As you know, a lot of counties write that out. So there are footnotes to a lot of these, and I was trying to recall what that one actually said. I think we had talked about fire suppression to be a minimum of 13D unless the locals have not adopted a fire suppression requirement. Donnie, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that typically if it's IBC, whatever the IBC requires for fire suppression based on the occupancy is going to be enforced. But there are some locals that exempt their IBC. For example, in Salida, we did a project that was a 4-unit complex that would typically require fire suppression, but they amended their ordinance to exempt 4 units or less from fire suppression. So we do have to take that into consideration. We wouldn't want to enforce a fire suppression on a structure that the locals normally wouldn't do it. So and typically if it's IBC, we'll enforce it if the code enforces it, unless the locals say otherwise. But on the residential side, that's really the locals. All we're looking for is whether or not they enforce that on theirs. But I think the idea is to, instead of having the option of a 13D or 2904, just keeping it 13D design, so that at least we know that just about every jurisdiction accepts the 13D. There's not really anything based on the survey that says that a local jurisdiction only allows a 2904. And just about every scenario, there's a 13D at a minimum. And then some locals exclude the 2904. So that's why we're going with the option of, if you do require it, then it's going to be a 13D for residential. And then if it's IBC required, then we're going to enforce it unless the locals say that they don't enforce it for that specific structure.
Thanks.
Okay,
Tom.
so just to clarify, so that if required by locals means effectively it's required where it's required by code, or it's specifically not required or by locals.
For residential, if they require the fire suppression system in their jurisdiction for IRC, then we will enforce it based on a 13D design. That's the idea. If code requires it for commercial, then we will enforce it based on the code. And only if a local was to come back and say, well, we wouldn't typically enforce that fire suppression system in our jurisdiction, we would consider that as part of the requirement. But like I said, in most cases, there's not very many locals that amend their IBC for fire suppression, but there are some.
Right.
So
Yeah, I guess I was just making sure that we're not ultimately deferring fire suppression to the locals unless it's really the scenario that you're talking about where it would make it arduous for modular construction. Otherwise, the IBC or the IRC does the majority of the base code makes the code on whether or not fire suppression is required otherwise.
yeah, and that's why the footnote for fire suppression or the section there says if required by locals. I think in most cases the locals will require for commercial. It's just for those one or two instances where they might amend it. But all we're asking is yes or no. Are you requiring it? Right? And if they say yes, then we're going to apply the applicable suppression system.
Wayne, does that help clarify for you?
I think so. It's funny this slide is called semantics because I think that's what I'm picking up on. I just think the order of operations needs to be clear that, hey, ultimately, this is a building or IRC topic, right? That drives whether or not fire suppression is required, unless that local jurisdiction has, for some reason, amended out needing sprinklers for a particular use or occupancy or condition, right? Because I just think it's a little bit misleading with that footnote because but maybe I'm not reading it in full context, but I just want to make sure that we're all kind of saying the same thing here relative to in understanding that ultimately the IBC and the IRC are what are overwhelmingly driving whether or not fire suppression is required or not based on occupancy and size.
I think we are, Wayne.
Okay.
We can take a look at clarifying the footnote too. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Tim, I think you were next.
Yeah, one quick question for clarification then from a process standpoint. Then the manufacturers would coming out of the gate be required to check the locals one way or the other with whatever project and site specific location, and then provide their plans based on that. And then whoever does the plan check with the state or third party, part of their process would be to verify that with the local that was the case. Would that be a correct process?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Correct. And again, the key part is we're going to approve the plan, and then when those plans are approved and then submitted for a site specific address, it is our expectation that we'll do a screening with the local design criteria. Donnie, Sam, I know you had your hand up next, but go ahead and then we'll let Donnie respond.
Yeah, my comment is that from my researching of this, somewhere around 75% of the jurisdictions in Colorado and the country do variance out fire sprinklers for residential structures. So I think to Wayne's question, it is, it's confusing if you don't know that. In other words, so it is the rule of the IRC is that they do have to be, have fire sprinklers. The way it works in reality is that a great deal of them don't. And the other aspect of it is that fire districts in Colorado and all over the country also require fire sprinklers over and above the jurisdiction. Now, the jurisdiction would know that, but that's why it would make sense for the manufacturers to check with the local jurisdiction, unless at some point state of Colorado says you can't variance it out, but as it is now, there's less that require than do require.
So, Sam, that's a very good point. And so maybe one thing that I would also ask is that if it's based on the number of jurisdictions, you're right, the number is probably 75% or so that don't require fire suppression.
That came from actually from Shums Code, from Steve
Okay.
Thomas, because I had asked, Telluride actually has been on, we've required the sprinklers, we never have varianced it out. But then Telluride's different economically too. But I just feel that that's why that, if required by locals, as to Wayne, you represent manufacturers, and I get it, that would be tough. Although seemingly, if you were doing some sort of a design that could be used in a whole lot of different places, maybe those could be whatever put
Do we
in
know,
prior.
Sam, do we know by population if the 25% that do require it cover 50, 60, 70% of the population?
It was funny. I talked about it a lot with Steve. Just he's a friend, and just because of
Sure.
that kind of stuff. But I think possibly that's something you guys are involved with Shums Code, because I do think, at least in my opinion, because of the wildfire code, which is a little different, but I do think that it would behoove, if it's in the code, for all of us to do it. I know there's lots of reasons economically that it gets varianced out, but my point is from if manufactured structures, often used for subsidized housing or workforce housing or whatever we're calling them now, seems to me, even if they're duplexes, like, they should be sprinklered. But that's my opinion. But that'd be a good question for Shums Coda.
Yeah.
A quick question. Was it Donnie who said 75% of the people remove it, or 75% leave that requirement in for single family?
No, 75% of the jurisdictions is how Steve put it, which would be mainly local,
Yeah.
variance it out.
Right.
Only
Okay.
25% and it's been in the code since 03 or something. I mean, Tim can
Yeah.
help with that. He's better with that, but it's been, my opinion is the ICC codes are sort of based on active fire suppression and it gets varianced out. And I often feel like the codes get sort of, well, they're not being used correctly, let's put it that way.
Well, but we need to stay consistent with site build. So if there's a universal requirement that you can't variance it out, I think what we're trying to do is say, though, that manufactured homes are exactly the same as a site built home. So if a site built home, it gets varianced out, I don't think we should have a requirement for manufactured modular homes to have to abide by code that locals don't.
But that's my point. That's why that statement, fire suppression, if required by locals, it wouldn't, I don't think, well, at least that I've heard of, whether it's manufactured or site built in the jurisdiction doesn't matter,
Yeah, and Charlie, you bring up a good point, and I saw Wayne's hand go up again, and Tim's, and Donnie's still patient.
Oh, sorry, jump in. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're
Yeah.
fine. And so that 75% requirement, and we'll get clarifications from Shums Coda, is what it may only, cover 20 to 30% of the entire state population. So having sprinklers and having a plan that is reviewed and approved with a sprinkler system may allow that plan set to be used in more populous areas that already require it. But we did write in an option that if it's not required, and we can have this discussion some more, may make sense just from a numbers perspective. So let's go to Donnie and then Wayne and Tim, I think. And Tim, I might bump you up just in front of Wayne, just because I know you've got a bail here on a second. Donnie, do you
So-
want to, you still got your hand
Guy
up?
from Elevated came out.
Yeah, one
yesterday.
thing, I'm gonna mute Nate here. Just to eliminate the background. Oh, just real quick, for the requirement of the fire suppression itself, it can get a little complicated because, if we get too specific in the scenarios, there's going to be a scenario where it might not cover. So just keeping it, if required by locals, is going to keep it simple. If the locals require it, we're going to require it. But just remember, there are manufacturers that build lot models, right? And there's going to be scenarios where they're not sure where these structures are going to go, but based off the code, typically it's going to require fire suppression. We got a lot of oil rig or oil companies that purchase these oil pump stations. I don't think there's going to be a local out there that says they're going to exempt an H occupancy from fire suppression. So I think the assumption is going to be in most commercial cases, locals are going to enforce what the IBC requires. There's just going to be some scenarios where there will be a local that amended their ordinance that might exempt certain ones, but I would say that's going to be very slim circumstances on that one. But the other thing too, with the plan approval process, I think the idea with creating these regional design criterias or these regions is to eliminate or try to eliminate as much as possible on the plan review side of things, having to look up all the locals' information, right? If you're going to submit a design to the Division of Housing or the third-party agency, this is going to be a Region 1 building, snow and wind. We are going to verify that your design meets the Region 1 snow and wind loads, and then you're going to tell us whether or not you're providing a fire suppression or not. These other design criteria, we shouldn't have to really go back to the locals and figure out which one of these they apply, unless for some reason you're saying that you're not going to provide fire suppression for a specific site, right? Then we might want to look at the design to verify whether or not the locals do or do not require fire suppression. But if you're just giving us a lot model saying, hey, these are going to be the minimum requirements that I'm designing to, that's what I'm doing the plan approval for, right? It'll be up to you as a manufacturer or the seller to ensure that the structure that consumer is buying will go into that location or that specific site location, or that it'll fit the minimum requirements of the local building department of where that unit's being set, right? Because we're just approving the design. You need to verify that it actually can go into that local jurisdiction. If you want to do a site specific, those are going to be I would say the majority of the cases where we do look at the local data, because this is a site specific model. If you're submitting a model that can go in multiple areas around Colorado, you're going to submit a design for the minimum requirements that based on this table here, right? And then it'll be up to you to verify that if it's in that locals. And then at the local level, when you're pulling a permit through them, or not you, but the applicant is pulling a permit through the locals, all the locals just doing is just verifying that the design criteria that was on the approved set of plans meets their minimum design criteria. And that's it, right? We shouldn't have to look at every single locals for every single one of these plans.
Yep. Donnie, let's give Tim a minute because I know he's got a bail, and then we'll do Wayne.
Yeah, thank you. To Sam's point of view, I agree that I don't know about the 75%, but I'd say the vast majority of jurisdictions, and I know for sure in the Denver metro area, have, as we say or pointed out, amended it out because it has been a base requirement in the IRC. Broomfield, I had amended that out ever since it came in to the code, and about 3 or 4 years ago, with the help of North Metro Fire District, we brought that back in. So I amended the amendment out. Like that's kind of a double negative, and brought it back in. And at that point, I did a survey. I don't have it right in front of me to show that to my city council. And there was Boulder County has had fire sprinklers for a long time, but maybe some of the mountainous areas, but in the Front Range here along the I-25 corridor, Westminster, I think, is the only one that we found, and so we're neighbors to them, but I don't know if any, and I think Shums Coda would have better data, but we did have before I had I had it amended out, I had two different situations that locals could probably come up with, and one was a subdivision that was built, and by agreement with North Metro Fire, they went with narrower roads. So they agreed, McWhinney agreed to put fire sprinklers in all those homes. And then I had another builder with a dead end road in a subdivision that was too far from the fire code requirements. And so there were 7 homes that needed fire sprinklers just in that, like, site specific in that development. So I agree that getting some clarity that from, like Wayne had pointed out, that, you know, it is, you start out with how the IBC or IRC requirements, and then you defer and check with the locals for site specific. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Wayne, you still got your hand up?
I do, thank you. Yeah, so I think we're more or less getting to the point I was trying to make earlier. I think the other question that was kind of coming up in my mind, right? We ran through the scenario of, right, we don't want to require sprinklers if the locals, for whatever reason, have amended it out. But I think that, or I guess I'm asking, is the intent to also, you know, have this be a catch-all for where locals might have more restrictive sprinkler requirements? Because I think that's another scenario, and I know, Donnie, we've kind of worked through that in some of the one-on-one calls, that I think is equally problematic, right? I know the intent is to have these design regions, but ultimately, as the gentleman was just explaining, right, if we've got other issues at play, we might leverage sprinkler systems or require sprinkler systems to offset a different code compliance item. So I think that there's going to be more of that as modular construction continues to evolve here, and I think we have to kind of, you know, not fixate so much on smaller residential type construction, but also try to future-proof this relative to how this is going to evolve, because it already is. So I guess I just wanted to ask that question and see. I see Donnie raise his hand, so I'm sure he'll answer.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne. Donnie?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Wayne, can you repeat the question?
So basically, I'm asking if required by locals, if that's also intended to be kind of a catch-all where the local requirements might require sprinkler systems for for a particular application that might be, you know, more arduous than base code. Was that also the intent for that?
Yeah, so well, if it's, the assumption is that when we're talking about residential, it's going to be, based on the conversation earlier, 75% of them are probably going to say no and it's not required, right? And it's not required, and the 25% is going to say yes, it is required. But so it catches that, right? The scenario where in most cases it's not going to be required. We don't want to enforce it if it's not required by the locals. But on the commercial side of things, like I said, I would say in the majority of the cases, locals are not going to amend their code to not require fire suppression for commercial. So I would say that it catches all those scenarios as well, where in the event that they did make an exemption or have some kind of special local requirement that fire suppression was not required for that commercial building, then this would catch that scenario as well, right? But I would say in majority of cases, it's going to be needed because it's just in the IBC for that specific occupancy, it's going to be required, right? So, but it also, this scenario, it like I said earlier, that you might have a lot model or a stock model that you're building and you're not sure if it's going to have fire suppression or not. If you submitted a structure to me and it said that it does not have fire suppression, well, it can't go to a jurisdiction that requires fire suppression. You're going to have to submit another design, or you can submit one plan that has elevation with fire suppression and an elevation that doesn't have fire suppression, right? But you have to account for that in the design when you submit it. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to get this plan approved with no fire suppression and take it to a jurisdiction that requires it and say that it's okay. It's not, right? It has to meet their minimum requirements.
Yeah. No, I'm in agreement with that. I think I'm just inherently a little nervous, right? Whenever we try to kind of boil this all down to, a simple decision tree, because in my mind, the reality is, even though we can create these regions, ultimately there still needs to be due diligence by the design team to look at what's required by the codes adopted by statute, but also locally relative to where this is actually going, right? Like I think at some point there becomes this impasse of, hey, you still have to own the location that this is going. You still have to know if there's water infrastructure in place, and if there's not, right, you need to start making those adjustments. And that's not a knock on modular construction. That's just construction in general. So I think that's the part here. I guess I keep beating on a little bit, is that we need to simplify. At the same time, we need to not oversimplify in a way that makes this an issue down the road.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so this table is more of the decision making, whether or not it's going to be needed or not, right? So one of the other things that I'm looking into is if there's any underlying design criteria by design that might we need to take into consideration for the specific structure. So, for instance, a 13D system can be a wet system or a dry system, right? But each design is different. So in a way, the wet system versus dry system could be a design criteria. So maybe the locals don't have enough water supply for that, even though that the 13D is a lower pressured system. They don't have enough water there. They might say we still require it, but it has to be a dry system, right? We can consider that as part of the design review process on our end. The other thing would be if it's a standalone system versus the multi-purpose system, right? Again, they are two separate designs, and so we would have to take that in consideration as well. Maybe the locals, I think, Tim Pate was talking about a scenario in his jurisdiction where there's something, I think, low water pressure in one of his communities, so they have to do tanks in the crawl space or the basement, right? So I would say is a design criteria. Is it going to be a standalone or is it going to be multi-purpose? Because each one is designed differently. So I'm trying to look through the 13D systems and seeing if there's anything that may be considered a design criteria, so we can possibly create a checklist for the plan submittal process, so that when the manufacturer is talking with the locals, like, hey, do you require fire suppression? Yes or no? And they say yes. Okay, well, we're going to do a 13D. Is there anything that we need to consider that you have amended as part of your local ordinance for this area that I need to consider as part of my design, right? At the end of the day, the design is going to be specific to the structure, but the flow is going to be specific to the system itself. So however that design comes out, it's going to tell you, I need a minimum flow rate of this for this to operate correctly, right? And we would have to verify whether or not the locals can have that, I guess, minimum supply for the water if they're going to do a wet system, or whether it's going to be standalone or needs to be standalone versus if it can be a multi-purpose system.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. That feels a little backwards, and maybe that's the only way to do it. But ultimately, right, like on regular, construction, the water supply kind of gets figured out relative to fire flow, which is an IFC thing. So keep that in mind. But typically we address that earlier on, like site planning. So if we're not sure, right, like we might be setting, to a certain extent, these projects up for failure, or at least late knowledge relative to water infrastructure, if that's kind of the process that we're following. Because yes, it is design criteria, but that could hydraulically, particularly in commercial construction, could hydraulically implicate that site very late in the game. So I don't know how we fix that per se, other than I keep coming back to, there still is designer due diligence that's required, regardless of whether we're modular or not. And I think that's really what it comes down to. But I think we need to just, I guess, all speak the same language relative to how we implement these things and how this ultimately gets rolled out.
All right, thanks, Wayne. So we'll keep working on this. And Andre, I saw your hand pop in for a second and then it went down. I assume you're okay. If you got a question, you want to make a comment, you can.
No, thank you, Sam. Wayne said it really well. I mean, the due diligence factor is kind of there. And in my experience, some of these places where we're talking about the fire suppression issue, it is triggered at the site development phase, right? It's triggered because of lack of access or fire apparatus issues, getting something up a hill, right? Things like that. So some of these other superfluous things do have to be taken into consideration. But yeah, Wayne did a really good job, I think, closing that point.
All right, cool. Thanks. All right, then we'll jump into audits and responsibility matrices. Those we are still working on, both for the audit procedure and policy, and what we're calling the audit handbook at this point. So we will still work on those, although we have added every rule that we plan on adding into the different sections of the administrative rules by entity type. The responsibility matrices, as you know, it's getting we're almost into a 3D, 4D, 5D model, and we're trying to line that out and make it very easy for people to understand. Fire suppression, we have talked about that. So we're not going to revisit that now. And then Shroom's Coda update. Andre Cole.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Sam. I do apologize for my voice. I think I'm coming down with something too. It's going around right now. I'll keep it brief on this one, everyone. Since our last meeting where we were able to talk a little bit about the survey data that we had gotten back, and the decision that the TAC made regarding moving forward with the 24 codes, we've been working hand in hand with DOH's team to do some deep analysis on these, explore any blind spots, any issues that we can kind of get a bit deeper on. We've had two meetings, one with DFPC, another with ASCE and the DOH team in order to be able to clarify some of these issues. So that's really been our focus since our last meeting is preparing some documentation, exploring some of those issues, and then reporting back to Sam's team. But if there are any questions or any comments of items that need to be explored by our team, I'm all ears. I'm always happy to listen.
Any questions for Shroom's Coda? Thanks, Andre. All right, with that, we're going to possibly end this a couple minutes early, but we will certainly provide more discussion if anybody wants to. We'll stick around till 10:30 or so. So just this rulemaking 2 schedule, again, just to give everybody some grounding on what we've got coming up. March 11th will be our final draft of the rules to send out to the TAC, and March 8th for the March 18th discussion. And that's where we're going to lock everything in because we have to go to press with those with the Colorado Register notice on March 31st. And then May 5th will be our public rulemaking hearing and adoption by the State Housing Board. And after that, we just ask for a legal review. And then June 10th, once we get that legal review, we'll publish that in the Colorado Register as the adopted rules with the June 30th permanent rules in effect. Next meeting, February 4th, we're going to continue discussion on rulemaking 2. Again, we'll flesh out any other rules we've got. We will finalize the recommended design criteria regions and have that for discussion at the February 4th meeting. And finalize the GC licensing and education requirements, and then have that audit, the responsibility matrices for review. That is a later time meeting. It'll start at 10:30 and go to 12:30. Bring your lunch. 4 more meetings, folks. Thank you so much. I'm really very impressed that you guys have had great attendance and great participation and really helped us flesh out these rules. Our team is feeling very comfortable about getting this all done in time. But we are working hard. So if you have any questions on this, let us know. And with that, is there anything else anybody would like to, from the TAC members, discuss? Or if there's any members of the public that would like to ask a question, we'd be happy to take those. Otherwise, we'll give you 15 minutes back in your day. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and then I will start shutting down this meeting.
45 minutes, Sam. This is like a record.
Thanks, Wayne.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right, turning the recording off.